Hi, I'm Simon. Thanks for tuning into The Ordinary Filmmaker. If you're new here, subscribe to get notification of new videos like this one so you don't miss any news, rumors, or tutorials. And by the way, I'm giving away a brand new Canon EOS R5 full-frame mirrorless camera to one lucky viewer. Details are in the description down below, or you can watch this video here, but essentially all you have to do is subscribe for your chance to win. Sadly, this is my second time shooting this video today. Once again, the Canon R5's metering has blown away the highlights enough that I just couldn't use it, and it was a cloudy, overcast day. It just seems to me that the R5 default for manual mode is evaluative metering, and there's no way to change this. I've tried experimenting with different settings, tried changing things around. I've been working on this for many months right now. So unfortunately, until Canon addresses this metering in manual mode, I'm going to be staying inside. I'm just wasting way too much time shooting outside, having to reshoot. And if you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll remember that I didn't have any of these metering problems when I was shooting with the Canon 70D. Since getting the R5 though, it's been a battle every time I shoot outside with one of these question and answer sessions. So I'm no longer willing to lose time because the R5 can't keep me exposed properly. You'll remember last weekend, I was overexposed once again at the beginning of the video, and this was an overcast day. There was no sun. I was shooting in C-Log. I had everything set up correctly, and while the Canon R5 is a great all-round camera, long outdoor sessions have a high failure rate for whatever reason. Now I hope this is addressed in the next firmware update, but have you had any problems shooting long segments outside with the R5? Let me know in the comments section down below. But enough ranting, let's get into this week's questions. Our first question is from Beach Bum. Beach Bum asks, can you explain what a global shutter is? So first of all, with cameras, there's actually two ways of recording the information off the sensor. You can have a global shutter, which captures all the information at once, and then you've got what is a rolling shutter, and what that does is it reads one line at a time like this. And the problem there is if you're moving the camera, panning the camera pretty quickly, or if you've got something in the frame or a subject moving quickly through, that subject tends to be warped a little bit or skewed. And that's obviously not the greatest. Now, depending on the camera, like the R5 has a really fast processor, so rolling shutter isn't too bad. But on the EOS R, the rolling shutter is almost enough to make you feel a little nauseous. It's pretty noticeable. But there is one other issue with the rolling shutter. In this video here, you can see I shot some fireworks on Thanksgiving weekend last weekend. And if you notice, take a look at some of the fireworks. It looks like a quarter of the screen or a third of the screen isn't lit up, whereas the rest of the screen is. And that's because the fireworks go off at such a rapid rate that by the time the shutter's halfway through, it's missing some of the information. So you get that sort of spottiness to things like fireworks or other things. So that's a bit of an issue too. Now with global shutter, because it captures the entire shutter at once, you don't have this skewing problem and you don't have this flashing problem. But, and I know what you're thinking, yes, but Simon, with a global shutter, you don't have nearly as much dynamic range. And yes and no. That has been the truth up to relatively recently. Now, the Red Komodo has up to 16 stops of dynamic range, and it's got a global shutter. All I'm saying is if you're looking at buying a camera and you're going to be shooting video, you really, or even photos of things that are moving fast, you really want to take a look into how bad the skewing is and the flashing is with the rolling shutter. Like I said, some cameras like the EOS R has pretty bad rolling shutter, whereas other cameras like the R6 and the R5, rolling shutter is pretty minimal. Mara asks, what do you think about the future of your channel? Where exactly will it go? Are you going to start doing reviews of cameras, or your entire channel, is it going to focus on Canon cameras? I know you've been watching my channel for a long time, Mara. I'm always looking at how I want to pivot the channel, how I want to improve the channel. My vision hasn't changed on the channel since I set up my vision almost a year ago to today. But what has changed a little bit is where I devote my priorities. Probably around May, we started getting an awful lot of chatter about the Canon EOS R5, and I'll be honest with you guys, the R5 is one of the reasons why my channel grew so quickly. I was covering it whenever there was news coming out or rumors, and it really helped my channel. And so I had a few people, some friends of mine, who were saying, well, it seems to be like you're the rumor channel. And I didn't like it at first, and I thought, well, wait a minute. covering rumors is part of my channel, but is it so bad if I kind of focus on news and rumors right now? I mean, that's what people were watching. If I put out any other type of video, tutorial or content creation or anything like that, the views were like 1/100th of anything news and rumors related. So I thought, okay, well, let's pivot. I'm still staying with my vision about producing news, camera gear reviews, content creation, all that kind of stuff, but I'm just prioritizing towards news and rumors. And I knew that was going to slow down a little bit. So once the R5 came out, things slowed a little bit. And then once the A7S III came out, things really dried up. But I kept producing news, and I still think, based on the feedback I'm getting, you want to know news and rumors. That's stuff you really like, so that gets priority number one. But as you can see now, I'm producing a lot more reviews about gear. I'm getting lenses coming in, the Pair gear, for example. I'm getting video transmission systems. I'm getting monitors. I'm going to be getting the Ninja 5. I'm going to be getting more lenses. And because the channel is growing and I'm getting recognized, I'm getting a lot more companies coming to me saying, look, we would love you to review our stuff. And of course, Angelbird, I got, that's why this stuff is up here. I just recently did a review on Angelbird. And it's great because now that the news is drying up a little bit, I'm pivoting once again towards gear reviews. Now, I can't really say that I'm going to focus on one particular brand like Canon, or I'm going to focus on cameras. It really depends on what I can get my hands on. I would love to get into doing some cinema cameras, like some of the low-end cinema cameras, like the C70. I'm still planning on getting the A7S III in, but until I can get gear, I'm kind of, you know, you've heard the expression, beggars be choosers. And I know I buggered that saying up, or beggars can't be choosers. And I'm very thankful to all the companies that have submitted their gear for me to review, and I will continue to get more stuff. And as opportunities come up again, I'm more than happy to pivot. My goals and objectives are changed on a regular basis, but my vision, I like my vision. I don't see a need to change that right now. So Maro, just keep watching. You're going to see changes as the months go by, and I'm also listening to your feedback. You guys give me comments, you participate in polls, and based on what you say, I have actually changed things. Look at that intro of mine. I had an intro before that, and I had some complaints, so I said, well, if you've got an idea for something better, let me know. And Bogdan created that intro, so that came up. Other things that I've done in terms of lighting, in terms of my set, I've listened. You guys are some of the smartest audience members on YouTube. I'm amazed at the caliber of people that listen to my channel and the advice. Just the other day, I tried exporting in 8K, and I don't know why I couldn't figure it out. I know I was doing 3 videos that day, and I didn't have a lot of time, and I just at the end said, look, if you know how to export 8K, let me know. And there was 2 ways. One gentleman gave me 2 ways of doing it. One, I can just export a master file, but then I tell it to use H.264, H.265, so I don't get this huge master file. And then, of course, with Compressor, it's about setting up a custom, although I still had some problems there. But I really do appreciate the engagement and the ideas and suggestions you guys have. It really helps build a better community channel. Tay asks, I use my Canon R5 with my Ninja 5, and when I shoot 60 frames per second with the shutter at 125, my slow-mo looks choppy. Now, are SSDs slower than CFExpress cards? Ty, that's a really good question. First of all, SSDs, CFExpress cards, they're all what is known as non-volatile RAM. But like anything, it's like cars. You can get a really slow car like Honda Civic, or you can get a Ferrari FXX, which is very fast. Prices vary, performance varies, utility varies. So this image here, we've got multiple different types of solid-state storage. We have the standard SATA external drive here, which you can see the SATA 2.5 or the U2. And all of these pretty much top out around 550 megabytes per second. Yes, theoretically, they can go up to 600 megabytes, but you're not going to see that. You're going to see anywhere from 500 to 550 sustained writes and reads if you get a SATA SSD. Now, inside your laptop, or maybe in your computer, depending on how you put your computer together or where you've bought it, there's a different form factor, and that's the M.2. Now, the M.2 SATA isn't any faster, it's just using a different form factor. But the real speed comes in when you look at things such as NVMe. And these will go really, really fast. My iMac, for example, has 2 of these inside it, RAID 0, and it gives speeds of 3 gigabytes a second, or 3,000 megabytes per second, and that truly is very, very fast. Now, CFExpress cards, again, is another form of non-volatile memory. They have high performance factors, and what these are is really tie into bus speed. So when these connect up, I'm either using USB-C 3.1, or I'm using Thunderbolt, so I'm connecting directly into the bus. I've got high speed. And CFExpress cards, the slower ones, well, let's use Angelbirds as an example. Sustained write speeds are around, I wrote to the entire card and it averaged around 850 megabytes per second. So it's faster than the SSD you would have hooked up to your Ninja. And if I went with the Pro grade Cobalt card, that's even faster. It sustains write speeds over 1,000 megabytes per second, which is really, really fast. But let's go back to your scenario. You're recording, I think it was 4K 60. So let's assume it's 4K 60. Well, let's bump that up a little bit. Let's assume it's 8K. So the fastest recording, or the fastest speed you need for recording on the R5 is 8K, and I believe it's just under 3,000 megabits per second. That's 3,000 megabits per second. So let's look at your SSD. Let's assume it's slow and we're only getting 400 megabytes per second just to be conservative. Now, because I just gave you a speed in megabits, around 3,000 megabits per second for the 8K in the R5, we need to multiply that 400 by 8, and that gives us 3,200 megabits per second. So I get it. I know the Ninja the Ninja 5 won't be able to record 8K, but the SSD is more than fast enough to record your 4K 60. Now, there's a lot that could be potentially going on here. One, how old is this SSD? Has it received a lot of read and writes? Have you tested the performance? What I would use, download the Blackmagic test software for testing the speed of SSDs and run a test to see how it is. Now, if it's really, really low, try formatting, doing a full low-level format a couple of times on the card, repeat the test, try another format, do this a bit, and what you might notice is the speeds kick up a little bit. But if it is a speed issue, then you're probably approaching the end of life on that card. But there could also be some other issues too. So let me know. Test the card. You can also use F3 and F3 write and F3 read on the Mac, or H2 test to see the performance throughout the entire unit as well. But your SSD on the Ninja 5 at 4K 60 is more than capable enough of handling it. Paul asks, why do you need a neutral density filter? What's wrong with using a shorter shutter speed? If you're a photographer, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using a shutter speed all the way down to 1/8,000th of a second. But the shutter, it acts differently than the shutter, the shutter in photo acts differently than the shutter in video. It's kind of like physics. At the scale of black holes, physics acts very differently down in the very micro level, the quantum level, and they don't rationalize. Well, it's almost like that with the shutter. We have different laws when we're dealing with video versus photo. So again, if you're shooting a photo, you're concerned with the f-stop. So do you want to blur the background or not? So if you do, well, then you're going to choose your f-stop first, and then you're probably going to look at your ISO depending on the lighting, and then of course what else gets to change next? You're looking at obviously altering your shutter speed. In video, the rule is basically this: whatever your frame rate is, so for example, right now I'm shooting in 30 frames per second. The rule is you take that frames per second and you multiply it by 2 every time for best results. Now, if you're shooting in automatic a lot of times, you'll probably get anywhere from 30 frames per second up to who knows what. And the camera will do what it has to. It'll increase that shutter. But what tends to happen when you go past double the shutter speed, the frame rate with your shutter, things look a little strange. It's almost a little strobe-ish, or it's just not natural. And where I think the best results are is obviously twice the frame rate, but you can actually go the frame rate, and if your subject isn't moving around a whole lot, it's not too terribly bad. Most people aren't going to notice a difference, but you use a shutter speed of 1,000th of a second in video, you're going to notice it. It's going to look weird. People aren't going to know what's wrong, but they're going to look at the video thinking, there's something going on here, and it's just not quite right. So where does an ND filter come in? Okay, well, just like when you're shooting a photo, you might choose to want to separate the subject, myself, from the background. And how do you do that? Well, you shoot wide. You would use an f1.8, for example, or an f2. And if I shoot with an f1.8 or an f2, I'm going to be completely separated from the background. But if I try doing that without an ND filter, a variable ND filter, or any kind of ND filter, what would happen? I would end up, the video would just be completely overexposed, and it would look like a polar bear in a snowstorm, in a field of snow. That's why I use variable ND filters. One, it just gives me better control over what f-stop I use and some of the other settings, but also it helps you create a more cinematic look. If you're shooting outdoors in daylight, what you're going to find is when you shoot with automatic or you try to shoot with manual mode, you're going to find that everything, including your subject, is always sharp. Everything's going to be in focus. And that's because you don't have a variable ND filter to give you that freedom of choosing how you want the scene to look. So it gives you more flexibility and it allows you to produce better video as well. So good question. Alexa asks, what specs do you want and expect to see in the Canon M5 Mark II? And when's it supposed to be released? Oh, if you had asked me this question way back in March or April, I would have said, yep, it's coming out by Christmas time, anywhere from October up to December. It's going to have IBIS, it's going to be 4K uncropped, it's going to basically be the M6 Mark II with some improvements. And that's all changed because, well, I don't even have to say, well, everyone knows why it's changed. And Canon isn't getting rid of the EFM mount. The M50 Mark II is coming out very soon. But in terms of the M5, it's really hard to say. And if you look at the M5 and the M6 and you hold them right up against each other, they're pretty much identical. Okay, yes, the M5 Mark II is a little bit aged right now, but if you go back to when it was released and when the M6 was released, you'll see that really the only difference between the two cameras was the position and how the flip screen or the articulating screen folds out or flips out. So we were expecting the M5 Mark II to come out within the following year from the M6 Mark II, and it's very easy to use the M6 Mark II as a basis for what we would get in the M5, but we were expecting, the rumors at the time were saying that we were going to get IBIS and we're going to get 4K uncropped. But at this point, I haven't heard anything about the M5 since March or April. I don't know what's going. I don't know if Canon's thinking, well, you know what, they are very similar. Let's not bother with the M5 right now. Let's focus on other things. They've already said that the primary development right now is on the RF mount. And I wish I could give you more. I just, there's nothing out there, and I don't want to make up stuff just to try and get some views. So unfortunately, that's the best I can give you. KF Studio asks, what do you think of Canon EOS R and R6? I want to buy this camera. Should I pick the EOS R or should I just go with the R6? And can you test eye autofocus on the EOS R versus the R6? My focus is on photography first. Really good question here. Now, when KF Studio first asked this question, he didn't specify like photography, so I asked him another follow-up question. So what is your priority? So I'm going to take a look at it this way. The EOS R is essentially a mirrorless version of the 5D Mark IV. Some areas the EOS R is better than the 5D Mark IV, and some areas the 5D is better than the EOS R. But we're not talking about huge differences here. Now, where the 5D Mark IV does win out, it has dual card slots. So that's a benefit if you're a photographer because you can write to both cards, and being a professional, that's kind of a big deal. It's nice to have that redundancy. And the other thing that the 5D Mark IV has over the EOS R, well, it's faster at shooting. So if you want to shoot 5 frames per second, 6 frames, 7 frames per second, you can do that. With continuous autofocus, the EOS R, you're lucky to get 3 usable frames per second. So there's that. I'm not going to go in and cover all the details side by side of what ISO's like, white balancing and all that kind of stuff, because they are very close and you can go and look that up. But keep in mind here, because the the EOS R is a mirrorless version of the 5D Mark IV, which came out in 2016, you're essentially buying into much older technology. And the 5D Mark IV, while it's come down in price, hasn't come down that much more, and it's really strange to see that the EOSR is that much cheaper than the 5D Mark IV. But now let's take a look at the R6. The R6 is modern technology. It's got the same processor that came out in the 1DX Mark III back in January, and this thing is very fast. You take that fast processor and you add an IBIS, you've got better dynamic range, and you put all that together, and when you're shooting images, and now that you've got that really good autofocus system with the eye autofocus, you'll still get a few blurred shots every now and then. You get some missed shots, but your hit rate, your accuracy is going to go up. And even in low light, the R6 is going to perform so much better just because of having that IBIS. So when you might not have enough light to be able to stabilize the camera without a tripod, but that IBIS kicks in and gives you that stabilization so you can nail the shot. So the R6 for a photographer, I think, is light years ahead of the EOSR. The question is price. Now the EOSR is around, what, $1,500, and we might see a price cut soon. And the R6 is, what, $2,500. So there's a bit of a price difference. But if this is your business and you can afford it, you can save for it, I would definitely go with the R6. I just think it's going to be really good. Now, as far as doing an eye autofocus test, no, because I don't have either of those cameras here. But I can tell you, based on what other reviewers have done, the R6 is just so much better, so much more successful hit rate. It can shoot a lot faster too. You've got 12 frames per second mechanical. It's just so much better for photographers. Now, video, if you were into video, I would talk about other cameras that I think might be better for you. But for photos, no, the R6, I think you really can't go wrong. It's a solid camera. Frosty asks, should an ordinary filmmaker consider a video-only camera rather than a hybrid, given the new lower-priced video-centric cameras appearing? Or should he or she simply smoke a good Cuban cigar and ponder these choices? Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a good cigar and pondering some choices, especially if you got a nice coffee crisp or some other treats nearby. Frosty, I'll be honest with you. When I started this channel, I had no interest in cinema cameras. I thought, I was overreaching with the scope of the channel. I just wouldn't have the time to cover everything. But now that I've been shooting for almost a year on this channel, and the issues I've had with the R5 and metering, I'm excited at the thought of being able to test out a C70 or a C300 Mark III or the red Komodo or any of these low-end cinema cameras because of the issues that I'm having, and I really want to see how they perform much better. I know that in the lighting situations I had, there wasn't a lot of variance in the lighting, and I think that these cameras would just perform so much better and give me better results. So I'm excited to test that. I've been fighting with the R5's metering for about 3 months now, and the reason I'm shooting here is, as I said at the beginning of the video, I have given up. I'm not going to waste any more time. I wasted 2 to 3 hours earlier today with a little sunlight that we had, and I just said, you know what, until this is fixed, until there's a way around it, not going to continue wasting time despite the beautiful scenery outside. So there's that. But yeah, I don't know, does anybody out there have any cinema cameras they want to loan this channel? I'd be happy to test them out. Yeah, those are crickets chirping. Yeah, I figured there'd be silence on that one. Anyhow, Frosty, good question, thanks. Shirik says, I'm a wedding and event photographer, but I really love shooting landscapes. And I also am thinking about starting a vlog or vlogging and teaching videos about landscapes in my language. I love the Canon R5, but it's a bit overpriced. The Nikon Z7 and Z7 Mark II don't have inbuilt log shooting options, and Sony is also overpriced. Still, which camera do you think I should get? Okay, well, there's a few key words in there that I'm focusing on. One is that you're a landscape photographer. And if you're doing landscapes, you really want to focus on high megapixel cameras. So the Sony a7S III is, you want to just completely cut that out. 12 megapixels isn't going to be enough. I would say at a minimum 30, but some of these cameras coming out like the R5, I know it's a bit overpriced, as you say. 45 megapixels, the Nikon Z7 Mark II, 45.7 megapixels. Sony A9, I believe, what is that? That's somewhere around 60 megapixels. The Panasonic S1R, also much higher in terms of megapixels. But if you notice the cameras that I'm mentioning here, these are not cheap cameras. And I think it really depends on the business case you're putting forward. Is this do you have the budget for some of these cameras? And I want to ask you something too. When you say it's a bit overpriced, and I'm English, so when we say something's a bit overpriced, we don't actually mean it's a bit overpriced. We mean it's very expensive. We're used to understating things a lot. So I'll say this: if the R5 is just a little bit over budget, it's something you can afford to get in a certain amount of time, or any of the other cameras that I mentioned, like the Nikon Z7 Mark II, or some of these other cameras. And I know the Nikon, it doesn't have that inbuilt, or at least I don't know if it does. I haven't looked at the specs in detail for the Nikon Z7 Mark II, but there wasn't a lot of changes to it. The Sony A9 or any of these other cameras that high megapixels, that's what you're looking for. Now, if you can't afford those, I wouldn't go below 30 megapixels. Once you start get down to 20, 20.4, you're doing landscape. And for weddings, again, you probably want to be right around that 30 megapixels. You can make 20 work. And if you're a good photographer, it's all about framing. And there's less need to crop in later, but for landscapes, I just don't think you're going to be really happy with the results. I think you're going to grow out of the camera sooner than if you were to save up a little longer and get the camera that gives you the capabilities you need. But the thing is here, are you a wedding and event photographer that likes to do landscapes? And is landscapes more of a hobby, or is that a business too? And I think this plays a part in the answer too. If your bread and butter is wedding and event, then, don't worry about the high megapixel cameras. Stick to something, you could go with something like the R6. You can go with the A7 IV or the A7 III. I know you don't want to wait for the A7 IV. You can go with the A7 III. Nikon's got plenty of great cameras as well. And when it comes to the cameras, don't just focus on the body itself. You want to focus on a company as a wedding and event photographer that gives you plenty of really good high quality lenses, because that's what's really going to matter to you more than anything else. And I think Nikon and Canon, they have a really good lens selection, and they also have really, really good business support services, professional services. So if something goes wrong and you need something quick, you can get that. Sony and others don't yet offer that. So I think Panasonic does as well. They have professional services. And I think that's very, very important if you're a wedding and event photographer as well. So give me some more information in the comments. I want to know a bit more about what landscape means to you. Is this something that's a revenue generator? Is this something you really, really want to pursue? Or is it just more the hobby thing? Because if that's the case, then I would separate the landscape and just focus on the wedding and event stuff. Because what you've got to keep in mind is that whatever camera you buy, it is a compromise. And when these companies come out with cameras or lenses, they're saying, this is the use case for this lens. This is my customer for this lens. And the more you try to get a camera that does more things, the more it's going to do everything quite well, but it's not going to do anything really great. So keep that in mind as well. El Chapo asks, what do you believe is the best Canon DSLR specifically for portraits, and that isn't as expensive as the 1DX? You're not the real El Chapo, are you? And if you are, no problems. I'm not going to answer the question any differently. Just curious why you would have the time to watch a little channel like mine. Anyhow, so we're focused on portraits, right? Well, it's good that you said nothing more expensive than 1DX, because in the Canon lineup, that's pretty well it for portraits. It doesn't get any more expensive than that. The next camera down is the 5D Mark IV, and it's quite a bit less. Now, I'm trying to remember the price US. I'm getting the Canadian and US prices. But the 5D Mark IV has come down in price since the EOS R5 has come out. And I think that the 5D Mark IV is a terrific camera for portraits. But I want to back up a little bit here. If you're doing portraits, you really want to focus on a full frame camera. Full frame is very important, because when you get a wide open lens, like it's not here because it's on here, the 50mm f1.2, you can really separate the subject from the background, and you really get incredible results. But if you take that and put it on, let's say, a Canon 7D, for example, or a 70D, that 1.2 now becomes an f2 at the minimum. So you have less room to blur the background. And it's not as good in low light. So a lot of times when you're doing portraits, you're doing it inside where the lighting isn't the best. So full frame is what I recommend. So the 5D Mark IV, if you can afford the 5D Mark IV, it's a terrific camera for portraits. There's a ton of great glass from Canon on the EF mount. Don't think just because the RF mount is new that all the great lenses are with the RF mount. No, the EF mount has a ton of great portrait lenses. I use the 50mm, still on the R5, I think it's terrific. The 100mm is great, 85mm, and many others. People are trying to call me. Sorry about that. So if you want to, let's reduce the budget a little bit more. Instead of the 5D Mark IV, what's next? Well, there is the Canon 6D, and this is kind of the entry-level full-frame camera for DSLR. And this one here, it's okay. It's a little bit soft. A lot of people didn't like this camera when it came out. It was almost a downgrade from the previous camera, so I would kind of stay away from that. For DSLRs, I think the 5D Mark IV, if you're sticking with Canon, is pretty much your camera to go with. So, yeah. Now, if you said DSLRs and not Canon DSLRs, there would be many more options. Clive asks, what do you think about DJI's new gimbals? I think they're terrific. DJI makes great products. I've got their drone, what's it called? The Mavic Air, the first one that came out, and I use it periodically. It produces really good results. And I think the Ronin S, I bought it. It's solid. It produces really great results. It's got advanced features, so if you want to reproduce a given scene, you can program it, tell it what to do, and it'll keep repeating that move over and over again. However, for me, in my use cases, I got caught up in the marketing and it really did look good. I listened to reviews and I bought it and I got rid of it, unloaded it 3 days later. And here's why. It's very heavy. The first one is 4 pounds. Now the new one is 1.3 pounds lighter, but still, let's look at 1.3 pounds later. You're looking at, what is it, 2.8 pounds? Then you put on the R5, there's another 1.6 pounds. Then you put on the lens, the 50mm f1.2, which is one of the lighter ones. And by the time you're done, you're at 8 pounds. And what I was doing, a lot of times holding it like this, you're extended. And that, after about 10 minutes or so, you're going to feel it, and you're going to feel it the next day. And you could be a strong guy too, but unless you're doing exercise where you're holding out weights like this for 10 minutes or more, you're going to find that it's really tough. And I asked myself, well, okay, so it's awkward, it's heavy. I'm going to need another carrying case if I travel with this thing, or another case if I'm going up to the cottage or someplace, and so I've got more gear to lug around with me. And I really thought, you know, this is not for me. And I experimented with the Glide Cam, the Glide gear, and it was pretty good too. Not as good as the Ronin. The Ronin S is just phenomenal in the quality it gives you. And if you have the capability for something like that, the Ronin is terrific. But for me in my workflow, I thought, no, you know what? My next camera is going to have IBIS. I want to get a camera with good IBIS. And what I've noticed with the R5, the IBIS is so good for me that when I'm in the forest, I'm riding my bike with my son, I'm trying to trail him and capture him, it does a phenomenal job of stabilizing. And even walking, if you do the heel-to-toe walking, it can produce really good results. Good enough for me for my scenarios. And that's the thing is, what are your scenarios? How would you plan on using it? If you're just an ordinary person, you might find a camera with IBIS that works better. But if you're a professional, you do event work, you do corporate stuff, and there's a definite need for like run and gun stuff where you're going to be mobile with the camera and you want to be able to reproduce the same sort of stable, smooth video, then yes, the Ronin is well worth the price. It does a phenomenal job. So as always, it's what are the outcomes you're looking at getting. I think they're great, and I love what they've done with the SC Mark II. So it's a few hundred grams heavier than the Ronin S Mark II, but it can handle a heavier payload. So there's that big plus. It's got a more sturdier motor. I just think they're great products. Stop the FOMO asks, given the challenges of 8K video production for YouTube, for it to be more mainstream, do you think we need better codecs or faster hardware or both? Yes, yes, and yes. And that last yes was for something you didn't ask. So there's multiple things. Now, as you know, I have an iMac Pro, and I shot an 8K video the other day. And editing was a breeze. Now, I know you're probably surprised. No, Simon, there's no way. I know what the iMac Pro can do. Well, what I did is I knew that if I tried to edit it by just importing directly into the camera, it was going to be insane. It would be frustrating. So I did first convert to Apple ProRes. Now I did this right on the card. I used Compressor, I converted to Apple ProRes 422, and then I imported directly into my Mac's internal SSDs. And, you know, editing it was like I was doing in 4K or 1080. It was just buttery smooth, simple, no problems whatsoever. But when it went to export, it took a long time to export. It took almost, 40 minutes, 30 minutes to export, 5 minutes of 8K video. So there's a couple of things going on here. You can be more efficient and use things such as Apple ProRes, and that will really help you with the editing process. But when it comes to exporting, it's really based on the hardware that you have. Depending on the software you use, I know Adobe, they're very heavy on using the processor. Macs are more balanced between the GPU and the processor. And when it comes to your GPU, you want to have a GPU that can do H.265 encoding. And to give you an example, I don't know how many years it was. The 2016 Mac Pro came out, and I was thinking of getting it. I had the 2015 MacBook Pro. So what I did to get a benchmark is I had this 1 hour film and I exported it. It took 52 minutes in H.264. Then I tried H.265. You're not going to believe this. It took about 22, 23 hours. It was a long time. So I tried the same test, brought the external SSD over to the 2016, same software, same version, same everything. Repeated the test. Encoding in H.264 took 2 minutes longer at 54 minutes. And encoding in H.265, a lot quicker, 52 minutes. That's a huge difference. And if you look at those two computers, you can see that the 2016 MacBook Pro isn't that much faster. It isn't that much better. But it was the encoding. So the codecs make a huge difference on the hardware and the GPUs themselves. The editing codecs used, such as Apple ProRes. So there's codecs everywhere, right? If you could use the Ninja, and right now the Ninja 5 can't do it, but some of the other products that the company Atomos puts out, you can do 8K, but the limitation on the R5 right now is HDMI 2.0. It doesn't support HDMI 2.1, so you can't get that. So it's all of the above. But thankfully, FOMO, I think for a lot of us right now, you can get the headlines, but no one's really going to be able to consume. There's not enough people consuming that 8K video to really justify the extra effort and expense of you going through to produce 8K videos. Even 4K, I would argue, there isn't a lot of justification. But funny enough, you see two videos that are on the same subject side by side. One's 4K and one's not. Guess what people are going to go with? They're just going to choose the 4K. So that's why I do 4K. Robert asks, what do you think of the new box cameras like the Panasonic BGH1, the Red Komodo, and the two Canon cameras that just got registered? I think they're great. I think they're exciting. Just go back to the question that Frosty asked me, and I pretty well answered everything right there. As I said to Frosty, I started my channel a year ago, and I wasn't interested in cinema cameras. It was a whole level of expense that I just couldn't get into. But now, I admire them. The problems I've been having with the R5 and the metering, because it's a stills hybrid camera with great video, not the other way around. I'd really like to give a try to one of these cameras. I'm really hoping that I can make some headway with Canon. They were great in letting me have the R5 a week before it was released, and I'm hoping to get the C70, maybe some of the other cameras to try out, because I know it's going to make video easier. I know it's going to be different, but I'm really excited to try them out. And the Red Komodo, I mean, look, this thing's got a global shutter, and it's still got 16 stops of dynamic range. So very, very excited by these, Robert. Prince asks, what if Canon gave us 6K video in the R5? Well, to be honest, it wouldn't really do anything for me. Everything I shoot right now is 4K HQ, sometimes C-Log, sometimes it isn't. I'm only just starting to play around with 8K, but not because I have any serious need for it, but because it's there. Giving me 6K, really not a lot of interest, unless, of course, they can give me 6K oversampled 4K and the overheating isn't as bad. But I don't really see that happening. To me, there's really no benefit. I mean, you can always take that 8K and then break it down into a 6K file after that. But I don't know. Are you interested in seeing 6K? What would be the use case for you? Why are you interested in that? That's, I think, a better question to ask. Our last question comes from Jeffrey. Hey Simon, I asked this question before, but you probably missed it. Can you tell me, with the R5, what video features work with 1080p, for example, 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second, overheating, and what you think of the overall 1080p quality. First of all, I think that 1080 is not in any way old-fashioned. A lot of people still deliver 1080. A lot of people can only deal with 1080. So I still think it's a very, very useful frame size, a resolution to use. Now, as far as getting 120 frames per second in 1080, no, it's not available now, but it will be. Canon has already stated that in future firmwares, we're hoping before Christmas, we will get 120 frames per second in 1080. However, you can still get that in 1080 now, but what you have to do is shoot in 4K at 120, and then bring that into your 1080p project, and what the computer will automatically do is downsample it for you, giving you 120 frames per second. The same with 60 frames per second. I don't shoot with 1080 much anymore. I did a video probably 3 months ago, back around July the 24th. The reason I remember that so well is I had surgery back then, and Canon loaned me an R5 for about 3 or 4 days, a week before they officially announced they shipped the R5. So go and take a look at that video, and I thought it looked pretty good, but you're not going to get the same level of detail as you will with 4K. 4K is going to be a lot more detailed, and my real recommendation for you, Jeffrey, is where you can, shoot in 4K. Shoot in 4K 30. Don't worry about HQ. Don't worry about those overheating modes, because it sounds like your clients are interested in 1080. Shoot in 4K 30. You won't have any overheating. And then in whether it's Final Cut, Premiere, or DaVinci, set up your project file for 1920 by 1080. And then when you bring that video in, your 1080, your final product, is going to look a lot better than if you shot in 1080. And this is true for almost any camera. And if you look at the C100, that is actually a camera with a 4K sensor, but it downsamples and outputs in 1080. And that's why the 1080 footage in that camera looks better than a lot of cameras, cheaper cameras that produce 4K, because the detail isn't there. So that's really something I would consider looking at, because you just can't beat 4K downsampled into 1080. It's just going to look better every day. Now, did you mention HQ? You didn't. And what about all the other features? Well, if you want to use C-Log, the advantage of C-Log, what that gives you more dynamic range. Depending on where you're shooting, that extra dynamic range, that 10-bit 422, can be very beneficial. You also need to look at, do you want to shoot in all I or IPB? Depends on how fast your computer is. Because you can shoot 4K 30 or 1080 in all I or IPB. Now, what I'm shooting right here, I'm shooting in all I, but I could very easily shoot in IPB, and I can guarantee you wouldn't notice, and most of my viewers wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I'm the only thing moving in the frame, and I'm not moving that much, or like that, right? So it's not a whole lot. The camera can easily anticipate, fill in the frames, but it's a little bit more work for your computer. So if you have an older computer, stick to all I. File sizes, you'll just have to deal with it. Storage is a little bit cheaper than getting a new computer. So I hope that answers your question. Final thoughts. I once again want to thank each and every one of you for not only watching, but for those of you that submitted a question. I do appreciate so much the engagement. I'm very proud to see so many of you commenting in my forums, talking with each other, having a discussion. And that's one of my goals when I set up this channel, is to create a community where people could come in, ask questions, discuss things in a safe environment. So if I don't tolerate any swearing at people, I don't tolerate people who are insulting. I'll either ban those people or I'll delete comments, because that's not what this is about. This is not a channel about serious subjects such as politics or global issues. It's about photographers, videographers, ordinary people that want to learn a bit more about camera gear, filming techniques, content creation, stuff like that. They want to ask questions. So each and every one of you, I do thank you very much. Now, for everybody whose question I have read, you do earn an extra entry into the Canon EOS R5 contest giveaway, but you do have to subscribe. So if you're not subscribed, then no matter how many questions you submit, you're not eligible. And so that's the real thing. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to grow the channel, but I'm trying to grow it with people who are interested in photography and videography. And I think what better way to do it than dealing directly with you guys. So thanks so much. And again, I do apologize. I'm shooting inside now. One of the other problems I had when I was shooting outside is my lips turned purple. My hands were become very difficult to move, and my mouth, I had trouble moving my mouth because it was getting so cold. I was cooling down. So I really do think that for the winter, shooting inside as much as I want to be outside is going to be so much better, so much easier to do. But that's it for now. Now don't forget to subscribe to my channel for your chance to win 2 prizes coming up when I hit 20,000 subscribers, which is only about 5,000 subscribers away now. And I'm going to be giving away the Synco Lav S6E, which is a really good entry-level microphone, especially if you're just shooting video from your camera, you don't have a mic. It's a great starter mic. And also the M3 shotgun microphones. So that's once I reach 20,000 subscribers. Then for every 10,000 subscribers up to 100,000 subscribers, I'll be awarding new prizes and more expensive, more interesting prizes. So monitors, I don't want to give too much away, lenses, all sorts of things. So stay tuned for that. And then once we reach 100,000 subscribers, once again, I'm giving away a brand new, not this one, Canon EOS R5 full-frame mirrorless camera. But that's it for now, guys. Again, thanks so much for tuning into The Ordinary Filmmaker. I couldn't be successful here on this channel without you. We'll see you again soon.